Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 230 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing the new movie Arrival, based on the short story Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang, and we'll also be discussing some of Ted Chiang's other work. And this will involve spoilers for the movie Arrival, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by three guests. So first up, we've got Chris Cevasco, making his sixth appearance on the show. From 2003 to 2009, he was the editor of Paradox, the magazine of historical and speculative fiction, and his short fiction has appeared in or is forthcoming in Nightmare Magazine, Black Static, and Space and Time, as well as in the anthologies Shades of Blue and Gray, Ghosts of the Civil War, and Zombies Shambling Through the Ages. He's also written a psychological thriller about Lady Godiva, a wartime resistance thriller set immediately after the Norman Conquest, and a political thriller revolving around the murder of King Edward the Martyr, all of which he's currently shopping around to agents. So Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, glad to be here.
Then next up, we've got Andrew Liptak, who you may remember from our panels on Stranger Things, The Expanse, Killjoys and Dark Matter, and The Magicians. He's the weekend editor at The Verge, and he also co-edited the anthology War Stories, New Military Science Fiction. His writings appeared in IO9, Clark's World, Kirkus, and Lightspeed. So Andrew, welcome to the show.
Happy to be back.
And also joining us today is Carol Pinchefsky, who you may remember from our panel on the Ghostbusters remake back in episode 213. She's a writer for Blaster and Geek and Sundry, and has also been a writer for Forbes and Mac Life. Her writings appeared in the New York Times, Time Out New York, PC Gamer, and Lightspeed Magazine, and she's also interviewed celebrities such as Neil Gaiman, Matt Smith, Daniel Craig, and Lucy Lawless. So Carol, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Okay, so I'm going to start off with Andrew. And so Andrew, you wrote a piece for The Verge way back in August called Arrival is already a strong contender for the best science fiction film of 2016. So why were you so optimistic that this movie was going to be good?
Well, it's based on some really good source material. Ted Chiang is one of the best living science fiction authors, and if you haven't read any of his books, or actually should I say his collection of short stories, Story of Your Life and others, you really owe it to yourself to do that. And Story of Your Life, which is what Arrival is based on, is in that collection, and it's a really fantastic story.
Mm-hmm. So was there anything else about the director or the cast or anything that also made you optimistic about the movie?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a big fan of the director, Denis Villeneuve. I think I'm going to butcher his name, but Villeneuve.
I think it's Villeneuve.
Villeneuve, okay. He directed a movie I really liked called Sicario, which I've been watching a couple times recently, and it's really, really well shot. It's got great cinematography. It's got a really great story, so just the crew alone was also what was really appealing for this film. He's also moving on to direct the Blade Runner sequel, which I think is filming right now. And on top of that, it's just not your typical First Contact story, as I said in the piece. You've got War of the Worlds, Battle Los Angeles, Edge of Tomorrow. And this year we had Independence Day. These are all stories where aliens come and blow shit up, and it's this is not that type of film, and it's nice to see something breaking that mold a bit.
Yeah. And so, Carol, you were so excited to see this movie that you actually talked your way into an advanced screening of it, right? Tell us about that.
Well, I didn't sort of talk my way into it. What happened was I get a lot of PR material, and I didn't get an invitation, and I was so excited about this film because I'd been looking forward to it for a while that I just called up the PR person and said, let me in, and she took pity on me and let me in.
And so why were you so excited about it?
Well, I was excited about it not just because of the cast, which really is stellar, but because I loved Story of Your Life. I thought it was just such a poignant, heartbreaking story, and I wanted to see it brought to film, and it was translated so beautifully. I credit the screenwriter for that. He did such a wonderful job, and so it really fulfilled the hopes that I had for the short story translating to film.
Mm. And you were telling me that you were trying to score an interview with Amy Adams and it didn't come through?
Yeah, no, sadly I didn't get it, but I tried.
But you're a big fan of hers, or?
Oh, yeah, I've liked Amy Adams for years. I mean, I've saw her in a Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode, and I thought, oh, she's pretty talented. But I kind of fell in love with her in a movie, a Disney movie. What the hell is that called? Where she comes to the real world after being in a Disney cartoon, and it's actually kind of a really quirky comedy. Oh yeah, Enchanted? I think it's called Enchanted. Yeah, and she blew me away with her charm, and in this movie she's completely different. She's a person who, as we learn in the first few scenes, has lost a child, and so she is just very somber and depressed, and yet she keeps going, so it's nice to see all these different sides of her.
So how about Chris? What were you excited to see this movie?
Oh yeah, I mean, ever since I first heard that they were, going to be adapting it for film, which was, a couple of years ago now, or at least, I was both super excited to see them do that because, like everybody that I think has read the story, I loved it. I love all of Ted Chiang's writing, and that is definitely one of my top 2 or 3 favorite stories of his. And I was also really fascinated by just seeing how they were going to translate it to film, because as wonderful a story it is, it doesn't necessarily jump out at you as something that would lend itself to being filmed. It's a very sort of introspective story. And yet, I agree. I think that the screenwriters and the directors and everyone did a really fantastic job. I mean, of course, anytime something like this happens, I've got my quibbles, but overall, I think they really did manage to capture the essence of what Ted Chiang was going for in the story.
Well, right. So, I mean, one way that they sort of tried to make it more suitable for film was really foregrounding the military elements, much more so than in the short story. And so that was one thing I was a little concerned about watching the trailers. There seemed to be a lot of soldiers and helicopters and stuff like that. I don't know. What did you think about? Were you at all concerned about that at all, or how did that play out for you?
Yes, I was actually a little concerned about that. And if anything, I think maybe it was a little top heavy, the movie, where we were getting so much of the military. But in the end, I think it added an additional layer to the story that I think fit well enough with the themes that were already being explored, that I didn't find it distracting, or as distracting as I thought it was going to be initially. I sort of warmed to that as the movie progressed. So I think it was fine.
Okay, so how about Carol? What did you think of the trailer and the soldiers and stuff like that?
Well, actually, I did not see the trailer because I am determined, and I'm working on an essay about it right now, I am determined to never see a trailer for a movie I know I'm going to see. So, since I knew I was going to see it, I did not see the trailer. However, as for the soldiers, there were some scenes with military people going rogue that wasn't in the original novella, or is it a novelette?
I think it's just a short story.
Yeah, it's definitely not a novella. It's either a short story or a novelette.
Right.
It's a novelette.
Right. Okay. So in the original novelette, there wasn't this military incident that takes place in the movie. I don't want to give too much away. I know this is a spoiler episode, but there wasn't too much of an emphasis. But what there was kind of annoying, actually. Like, I think it felt like it was kind of pushed in there, as if the screenwriter were told, like, oh, no, we need more action. We need more action. So that those scenes seemed a bit inserted to me.
Yeah, so I guess I'm going to have a lot more to say about that, but I want to sort of focus on some of the positives of the movie before we get too much into that. Because this movie is, I think we all agree, right? This movie is terrific. Does anyone think this movie wasn't terrific? No, right. Everyone thinks it was terrific, right?
There's a lot to love in this movie.
Yeah.
I really loved how, in fact, it didn't contain a ton of explosions and yet managed to be really engaging and exciting and wondering, oh my God, what's going to happen next? What is going to happen next? And I had this wonderful experience where I happened to be remembering the novelette, because I hadn't read it in a while. when I saw the film, so I was remembering it as this movie about memory is playing out, and that was really a cool moment for me. Like, oh right, I'm remembering things that haven't happened yet because they haven't yet played out on screen. So yeah, I loved this movie.
Yeah, and so I mean, and they did some nice, interesting things that weren't in the story, right? Like the whole thing with the weird gravity shifting corridor. I don't think that was in the story from what I remember.
No, it wasn't.
And I thought that was pretty cool. And yeah, just like visually, I thought it was really cool. I mean, the aliens are very much like they're described in the story. But I thought they were really cool. All the like their weird sounds they make, and the weird mist, and the way they squirt their little symbols in the air and things. All this stuff was just was really well done.
Which also strayed from. I mean, that was not how they did their writing in the story either. But I agree. I thought that visually that was much more engaging.
How did they do it in the story?
As far as I recall, they just wrote the things because part of what one of the ideas that was explored in the film was that in the story was that she was at first bothered by the fact that she was only seeing the alien writing once it was completed, and they would turn the whatever they were writing on, the stylus around to show her. And she made a point of asking them, can you let me watch you as you're writing it? And it was only when she did that in the story that she realized that they were making certain pen strokes that encompassed more than one word in the sentence. So they clearly had to have known how the entire design was going to end up, before they even started writing it. And that was sort of a breakthrough for her in exploring the language. So they were just writing it, I guess, with their appendages, somehow with some sort of writing implement on a tablet or something.
See, Andrew, do you want to say anything else about what you liked about this movie?
Yeah, actually, I'll jump in first and say it actually is a novella. I just looked it up.
Oh, really?
And, okay. Yeah, it was done written originally in 1998 in Starlight 2, which was edited by Patrick Nielsen Hayden. One of the things I found interesting is that there's definitely a military presence in the film, which the story doesn't have. But keep in mind that the story was written in 1998, when it was really a whole different world from what we have now. And I think that what the film did is it updated it nicely for what would be, I guess, expected nowadays. I mean, every alien invasion or alien arrival first contact movie has a military element to it. I think that if you weren't to include that, it would be a little bit strange. I think you'd have a lot of people sort of questioning that in after they, as they get out of the theaters.
No,
but
I'm going to say, Andrew, I mean, the military is in the story or in the novella. It's just really, really
not to the same extent that they are in the film.
But I mean that the Forrest Whitaker character, he is in there, and they mention like they're like in a army camp in a tent and stuff like that. But it's the kind of thing like I didn't remember it at all from when I originally read this story.
Yeah, and I think that the way it's portrayed in the film, it really signifies this post 9/11 sort of stance that or sort of expectation that you have with the military. I mean, you have very modern fatigues and weaponry being used and things like that. So I think that I think that's just a product of the time, since the story has been put together. I don't know if it had been written last year. I don't know if it would be any different. Maybe Ted would have made some slightly different choices. I don't know. But that was the only sort of thing I noticed with that. But I didn't find that it really distracted all that much, especially because it seemed like you had the military was basically just acting as a security force, and you had a whole group of scientists working on the linguist side, rather than the military. There were some people who were really sort of hotheads about it and saying like, well, we need to make a strong force. It was mostly around, let's find out what they're saying first, and then we will make a determination later, rather than shoot first and ask questions later. So that's what I took away from it when I was watching it. I thought that was a really nice departure from what you usually see in theaters.
Well, it's funny because I just went back and looked at the story after having seen the movie, and it's very striking going back to the story now how calm everybody seems and how measured and relaxed and everything, whereas in the movie they're all like freaking out all the time.
Yeah. The scene I really liked was when she walks into the classroom and everybody, all the kids are on their phones, and she's like, "Well, do you want to share anything?" And they say, "Well, you better turn the news on." I liked how they, you learn of an alien invasion through, cable news.
Yeah, instead of being texted.
Yeah. Actually, they were being texted. They're texting back and forth, but you have this.
She didn't learn that way.
She didn't learn that way. So she was sort of, this that's the one way you learn from it, rather than through Facebook. I know nowadays if aliens landed, the first place I would hear about it would be like somebody saying like, "Oh my God," on Twitter.
Actually, the thing about that scene that kind of left me hanging was she starts off and says, let's talk about how Portuguese is different from other Romance languages, and we never learn. Like, oh God, now I'll never know.
Stupid aliens always ruining everything.
Yeah, but I actually loved the language that the heptapods used. I mean, I actually thought that was one of the coolest things about this film. I mean, not just because it's squirted out into this inky cloud, but because it looked like an indecipherable but very real language. It looked like that there was there that you just couldn't figure out. So I really enjoyed that. I almost wish there were more of it.
Yeah, I wonder if they'll have like a heptapod language guide like they have for Game of Thrones and, Klingon and stuff like that.
Or Doctor Who, the Doctor Who written language, also based on circles.
They reminded me of coffee rings.
But no, I totally agree with you, Carol, that they did a really good job of making it seem like it was a real language. And yeah, all the linguistic stuff, I mean, I'm not an expert, but it all seemed really convincing to me, at least. How about Chris? You want to add anything?
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think again, it sort of goes without saying, but I think a lot of that has to be, credited back to Ted Chiang too, because I mean, that was one of the things that gave me my sort of sense of wonder as I was reading the story, was all the, he sort of intersperses certain subsections of the story with like, little paragraphs about the way language works, and it's sort of a trademark of his, I think, in a lot of his stories. I mean, he often does it with mathematics or science or whatever, but he manages to bring these like super interesting, super cool ideas to play and to bear in the story in a way that really feeds into the story and the characters and all the rest of it, but yet makes those otherwise really complex concepts and ideas accessible to me in a way that, I think I'm generally not very mathematically inclined, but when I read some of his stories, and the same thing with the language stuff in this one, it's like, I have so many moments where I'm almost like physically sitting back from the book stunned as like something suddenly clicks and I'm like, oh, I get that. That's so cool. And I think that's really something that he, Ted just excels at.
Yeah, the story is written from the point of view of a world-class linguist, and is completely convincing to me that, Ted, I guess, is famous for writing, one story a year or every year or two or something, and doing tons and tons of research. And that definitely shows in this story. I don't know how much research he did on language and linguistics and things, but it seems like an awful lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in Tower of Babylon, I think that's what it's called, Tower of Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I learned how to build a ziggurat pretty much, considering the research he put into it about the building of the fire and the laying of the mud. Like, wow, yeah, he is so detailed and yet never boring.
No,
so if I knew that trick, I wouldn't be writing nonfiction.
and it never feels like info dump. I mean, it always works so organically in the story. Which is, just amazing.
I don't know if anyone else had a chance to go back and look at the story after seeing the movie, but a lot of the dialogue in the movie that I didn't remember from the story is actually taken straight from the story. So like the thing about kangaroo being a misunderstanding, that's straight out of the story. There were a bunch of really cool things like that. Andrew, you want to add anything here?
No, I haven't actually had a chance to reread the novella since I've seen the movie, but that doesn't surprise me. I guess it's just because the dialogue in the film was really good. It was a lot better than what you usually get in a science fiction blockbuster. So it's nice to see them adapting the short. I keep saying the novella. But keeping it fairly close and actually borrowing from it rather than just taking a concept from it and then just running with it. Because you see a whole bunch of movies like that. Like they take the title and then they say, all right, we're going to change everything else, and we'll sort of go from there. So it was nice to see that the movie felt pretty close to what I remember the story being. Even if it wasn't exact.
Well, right. I mean, that's something that really strikes me now is that it used to be that you could basically take it for granted that if any really brilliant work of science fiction were adapted to Hollywood, with a couple of rare exceptions, not only would it be terrible, but it would be terrible in a way that completely made a travesty of the whole point of the story or the whole, what made it interesting in the first place. And I feel like we're finally getting into an era where you can go to see a movie based on a Ted Chiang story, for example, and actually feel optimistic that it's not going to be a travesty. And that's a really good feeling for me.
Can we also just take a second and just marvel at the fact that it's a movie based on a Ted Chiang short story?
Right.
I mean, that's just a sentence you wouldn't have heard, 10 years ago, just because, I don't think science fiction cinema was really as close to the literary world, but also it just wasn't looking for really in-depth material. I mean, there's a lot of great short stories over the years that would make great films, but you never really saw the effort made for people to try to adapt them. And now, not so much in film, but with the TV world, you have a lot of these books being adapted fairly closely. So just seeing sort of one of the communities sort of break out in this really high profile way is just astounding to me, and it's also just fantastic.
So do we credit Gravity for this?
Ooh. Well, Gravity wasn't based on any short story or anything.
It was still a science fiction film that was intelligent.
Yeah.
And didn't talk down to its audience. I mean, I think I consider that the first of the modern science fiction films, but I could be mistaken. What came before Gravity that we could actually be proud of?
Moon is a really good example.
Moon. You're right. Moon.
I think District 9 is another really great one. I would also throw out Elysium, but I think I'm probably the only person that likes it. I love that movie. I think it's a great film. But there's this handful of short stories that are these films that are really great. That I think Arrival really stands up with. Gravity's one. I think Ex Machina is another one. It's really smart. It's got really great actors. Even to an extent, Interstellar was really quite good, even if it had some flaws.
Yeah, definite flaws, but very good. Yeah.
To continue on what we were saying, like I think one of my favorite scenes that was literally almost taken word for word from the book was the whole conversation with the daughter about she's trying to remember the term zero-sum game. And that whole scene not only was taken word for word from the book, but I think it was really important that they chose that scene because that really was sort of like that was the crux of where you started to finally, it was when in the story, it was when you first started to get the hint that, oh wait, are her thoughts going back and forth to a different timeline? And I think that it was important that they reproduced that scene in the film. And then just to sort of approach it from the other side, I think one of my favorite lines in the movie that was not from the book that I think worked really well to bring out Ted's underlying story was when Amy Adams is hugging Jeremy Renner at the end and says, "I forgot how good it felt to hold you." And that is not a line that she says in the story, as far as I recall, but it was just brilliant because it really got across the idea that future events were something that she could think about using memory. And I just thought that was a fantastic line for her to say. And that was something that, as far as I recall, was just added by the screenwriter.
And I did kind of wonder about the line she said when she said, "My ex was a scientist."
Mm-hmm.
Like, was she talking about an ex-boyfriend, or was she remembering her future husband?
Right.
There is sort of one more thing I want to say about the transition from short story to film in the novella to film. The story was more about breaking down the logistics of language, and when I say I would have liked to have seen more about that, I really would have liked to have seen more about that kind of nitty-gritty that makes science fiction so fun for me. But they left out a bit about physics, which I was surprised about, because, what science fiction film doesn't love physics? I mean, that's the other reason why I love this movie. It's a science fiction film where the science is linguistics. And how often do you get to see that? I mean, sorry, it's probably why I love the story and the movie.
Well, the scene I was really surprised wasn't in it was the part where he draws the beam of light being refracted into the water.
Uh-huh.
I'm sort of baffled that wasn't in there. I don't know, maybe it just was too hard to explain, or it took too long to explain in the film or something like that. I wouldn't be surprised if they had filmed it and then cut it or something, because it seems like a really odd omission to me.
Really, and it was 3 drawings in the book, and we got it. I mean, the audience got it quite clearly.
I think maybe the missed opportunity for them to have included that was perhaps the clumsiest part I thought of the film was the Jeremy Renner voiceover, where all of a sudden you just get an info dump. And I mean, I think, just in terms of the film, it felt clumsy. I mean, I liked the information that we were getting because they were drawing from the information from the book, but that would have been a perfect place for them to have him. If he was going to do that voiceover anyway, you could have had little diagrams being drawn on the screen while he was talking about them, and you could have gotten it in there. I think that was probably a missed opportunity.
Yeah, that stuck out quite a lot for me. I thought it just all of a sudden it happened, and I was like, oh, okay, we're going with this. I sort of was expecting another one,
right?
And I think that it would have been a more effective tool if they had dropped another one in there at some point.
Right, returned to that format.
Yeah,
but, yeah.
Because this definitely wasn't a film where they explained a lot to you at all. It definitely requires the audience to pay attention, and I think that if they had done another one, it might have diluted a little bit. But even having one in there in the first place was a little strange.
But actually, the movie does explain something that isn't in the book, which is the reason why the heptapods leave. That's not actually explained in the book, the novella, because they just decide to leave, and they evaporate, and that's it. So I really do like the fact that we get an explanation. It's one that makes sense in the context of the story.
Well, and also, I don't think that I really was moved by the idea that their relationship broke up because she had not told him that their daughter that they were going to have was going to die.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was in the story. Maybe it is.
No,
it wasn't.
No.
And that was also a great moment.
Yeah, that was.
Because she's explaining it to a little girl in a way that makes sense to her and to us.
Because just at the end of this movie, I was just emotionally devastated, and I looked over at my girlfriend. There were just tears streaming down her face. She actually said as we were walking out that this is one of her 5 favorite movies of all time now. But I assume everyone was just emotional at the end of this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think I was more emotional with the story. Because
yes.
I remember when I first read it, that was tears streaming down my face. And here I just had a lump in my throat, which is still a great emotional reaction, but I think I was hit harder with the novella. I keep calling it story, short story, book. Sorry for my mixed up terminology.
No, you're just seeing it from all different perspectives, Carol.
Yeah, I think if you go into the film having, knowing the story, it's gonna, you're bracing yourself a little bit for what's gonna come, and so it still is an emotional experience, but it's, you have your guard up a little bit more. So I think I agree. I definitely got way more emotional when I read the story the first time than I did at the film.
Andrew, do you want to add anything?
I liked what they did with the film and with that revelation that sort of comes right at the end. Do you want to make a baby? And that hit me pretty hard, knowing that she knew exactly what the future was going to hold, and sort of just trying to comprehend that as a parent who has a kid who's 3 years old. It's just I've been sort of going a couple ways on it. It's like, on one hand, I can see where Renner's character was, would look at the daughter differently afterwards, after she told him what was going to happen. On the other hand, I can also see why she would still go forward and have the child, because you wouldn't trade those years for anything, even if they're cut short. And I thought that was a particularly powerful scene, and I'm still sort of trying to process it. It was at times it was a little difficult to watch, just knowing what would happen and trying to comprehend that as a parent.
I mean, did she really have a choice, though?
Well, that's kind of what the story was about. The
Yeah.
novella was about, free will, and does she have it, and she decides, yeah, I'm going to do this anyway, knowing how it's going to end, I guess. She doesn't actually say it's better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all, but that's the feeling I got when I read it.
Yeah, the film doesn't really make that all that clear, because it does seem to be a very deterministic sort of thing, but at the same time, there were points where you definitely realize that, maybe she can make certain choices, especially when she's flashing back to the general, the Chinese general. I think that there's definitely some leeway with how she, how her decisions alter things, but it was either way it goes, it was still a pretty powerful scene for me.
Yeah, the thing with the Chinese general, that wasn't in the story either. And
No.
Also, the daughter, Hannah, dies in a climbing accident
Mm-hmm.
in the story. I don't know why that was changed.
I think it was more powerful. It's just maybe it's just a little bit easier just to convey. Actually, while I was watching the film, I got the sense of, like the scene from Up, that whole first opening sequence.
Absolutely.
That's what it reminded me of. Is this? I mean, I think that it's probably a worse thing to see a child waste away due to cancer or whatever disease it was, than to just have it suddenly happen. I mean, I hope that I would never ever have to face either of those, but I can't imagine which would be worse.
Right. I think changing it to an illness like that served a couple of purposes. And one is that you just have to show a scene of her with her head shaved in the hospital dying. Whereas if it was like showing her like climbing and falling off a cliff, it would just take a long time. It would be hard to give it the same, quiet dignity.
And the emotional impact is because Amy Adams' character knows that it's going to happen. I mean, it is a thing that she would, you would sort of, a disease happening is not this sudden thing. It is a thing that you can anticipate. Whereas a climbing accident is just that. It's an accident you can't really anticipate. I mean, she can anticipate.
Well, yeah. What I was going to say too is that if it was a climbing accident, I think it would just raise the issue of can she prevent the climbing accident, and that would get into this whole thing that is not serving this story.
Yeah, and she did say something about it being an incurable disease.
Right.
So,
well, that gets to both the climbing thing and to get back to General Chiang, because I think both of those things kind of tie in a way, because, I don't think that, I think we're supposed to assume that these events, or at least the way it's conveyed in the story, more so than on the film, these are not events that are subject to change, because they're things that have already happened, even though they've happened in the future. But it's just sort of like all these things, she now knows what has happened. It's not a question of like, can something different happen? It's already a done deal. But to move back to General Chiang, see, I feel like that might have been one of the film's missteps. So this is, I guess, getting into one of my quibbles, but I feel like it's one thing for us to be given this idea that, time is is non-linear in the way that the heptapods experience it, and now she's experiencing it that same way. But with the general giving her that message to tell him over the phone, it kind of almost creates a paradox, because in other words, like, she can only have given him that message if already at that point in time he had told her in the future what the message was. But what reason would he have had to tell her that in the future unless he'd first gotten the message? So it muddies the waters of, I think, what's going on in Ted's story by making it not only seeing the events non-linearly, but making them somehow interdependent upon each other, going backwards and forwards, which I just think it's an unnecessary complexity that sort of takes away from the already, what was a hey, wow, cool factor that was there in the source material. And it just, I think it raises more questions than it answers for no good purpose.
But don't you think that was kind of what the zero-sum game part also did?
Well, but for the zero-sum game, it's a memory that she has from her linear past that she then tells her daughter in the future. But to have something from the future affecting the past, that doesn't seem to make sense in the context of the rest of the story, unless there's something else going on, which I don't think we need to have something else going on. I don't know. To me, that there's a sort of logical inconsistency there. Or if it's not an inconsistency, then it adds some other layer of complexity to the film that I don't think needs to be there. I don't know if I'm expressing myself.
No, because I agree with you, Chris. I mean, I actually found the scene where he whispers to her emotionally, it really worked for me, but I agree with you. Like, I had some of those same concerns, because I think that this movie is sort of an odd marriage of a Ted Chiang story with some kind of like familiar Hollywood movie elements.
Right.
And they're done really well, but there's nevertheless familiar Hollywood movie elements. And to the extent that I didn't like things in the movie, it was mostly the fact, like, I feel like I've seen this in other movies, and I wish that they had done something a little more original. Like, I didn't particularly like the way any of the military characters were portrayed. They just seemed to me to just always act in a gratuitously stupid way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the movie would have been more interesting if the military characters had been smarter, or more wise.
I never like it when military people break the chain of command, because they don't do that in real life, or if they do, there are really serious consequences. And so here are, a bunch of guys going off and threatening the aliens. And by the way, the fact that they were prodded on by an AM right wing.
Well, it was like Rush. It was obviously Rush Limbaugh.
That just really that really grated on me, actually. But so I didn't like it when military people don't act like they're actually in the military. So that part bugged me. I think for the most part, I think it isn't it their job really to think paranoid and think, okay, what is going to happen if they attack?
Okay, but I want to go back to the protocol thing, because that's really important to me. It always bugs me in movies where you have characters in some sort of like spacesuit or hazmat suit or something in some dangerous environment, and they just take it off for no apparent reason.
Well, as a linguist, I guess it almost makes sense, because, you kind of need to see lips to communicate. Well, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that actually didn't bother me, because I didn't feel like it was for no reason. I felt like she was trying to, at that point, get across their individuality so as to get into the idea of personal names. And if they all looked basically the same in these orange suits, she wanted to kind of distinguish herself from the rest of them. And also, they made a point of having her look at the little canary in the cage. And loved. Yeah, and they had established earlier in the conversations with the doctor that it was basically just an abundance of caution that they were wearing these things anyway, that there was really no particular danger, that the radioactivity levels were not a threat. And so, it's not like she took it off in the vacuum of space or something. It was, that didn't really bother me, because I didn't think, I thought there was very little risk and a lot of potential reward, and it did pay off.
But the risk is that she's disobeying orders from the military, like in such an important once-in-a-lifetime situation. It just seemed totally Hollywood to me. I don't know, Andrew. You're going to have to break our log jam here.
I think it is a bit of a cliche, just because it does happen so often. Is that somebody will? I didn't really get the sense that it didn't bother me because it's somebody taking a spacesuit off where they shouldn't. It's more of a just sort of a protective thing. What I got a little bit more out of the scene that I thought was pretty funny is that both Amy Adams and Jeremy Renner's characters had taken the spacesuits off, but the army guys behind them were like, "Nope, we're keeping these on. You guys are confident, we're not."
And then just the other thing I want to bring up with the soldiers is that, like, the Chinese general is talking about attacking the alien ship if they are not out of Chinese territory in 24 hours or something like that. And it just, to me, this is another Hollywood cliche that, like, 21st century human armies could fight interstellar aliens, which is completely ludicrous beyond all imagination, right? And
when the talk show host said, "Hey, let's shoot across their bow," like, they came from space. They came from so far away. It is incomprehensible. Holy crap! What can you possibly do to threaten these people?
Yeah, so not only is their technology probably at least 1,000 years in advance of ours, but they're in orbit. All they have to do is take a medium-sized asteroid and drop it on the Earth and destroy the whole planet. I mean, you have no chance of victory in this sort of situation. And I'm a little bit concerned that no movie that I can think of has ever acknowledged this reality, that if aliens ever actually do come, our military leaders are not actually going to understand this reality because they've just seen all these movies where they're like, "Oh no, we beat the aliens in every movie, let's go for it." So I think for the security of Earth, we need...
Yes, absolutely. Damn it.
That said, if we do have extraterrestrials ever decide to stop by, I can totally see people saying, "Well, let's get the guns and shoot them." It's not an incompatible thought.
Although I will, just to play devil's advocate, or not devil's advocate, but I think in the movie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there was actually a ship in orbit. That's just from the story.
No, there wasn't. It was just the 12 shells.
Right.
There were more in the book.
There were more, and also in the novella, they also do talk about there being some sort of command ship in orbit, but that was not in the film at all.
No.
Well, I mean, they could be in orbit. I mean, I don't know. It seems like maybe they were even like traveling through hyperspace or something. I assume that's what was happening when they were sort of disintegrating at the end. But my point is that if they can get from one star to another in a spaceship, they can destroy the Earth, no problem whatsoever.
Yeah. You know what's funny is, this is a science fiction movie, and so you always expect a little bit of, hand waviness and stuff. But the funny thing is that all of the sort of science fictional elements in the movie, they didn't bother me at all. They felt, for the most part, fairly, as grounded in reality as those sorts of things could be. The stuff that felt hand wavy to me was the sort of global politics and the just the sort of diplomacy going on. It just seemed like there was all these, statements being made. The stakes kept getting escalated for reasons that were never particularly clear to me. It was like, oh, this guy's going to do this guy's going to do that. They're going along with Sudan. I never quite understood what all the conflict was about. I mean, sometimes I understood where it was like, yeah, we're giving him an ultimatum. You've got 24 hours to leave. But that was all actually very hand wavy to me. And that didn't ring true to me, which is weird because that was like the least science fictional element in the film. And of course, again, that's not from the book at all. But I don't know, did that bother anyone or?
No, I didn't have a problem with that at all because, if you look at the current situation today, I find that a lot of us aren't willing to talk to each other. And I just thought that was...
Oh, the not willing to talk to each other I got, but it's just that it was the actions that everyone was taking were inscrutable. Not only just the foreign nationals, but the even within the command structure of the United States, it was like, wait, so now we're abandoning this post, but we're moving somewhere else. I don't know. I just never quite understood why any of the actions were being taken that were being taken.
I think my take on it was that I think that there was sort of a broad assumption that if somebody attacked, if China went and attacked their shell, the response back against everybody was imminent. So that's why the U.S. decided to pull back. I thought the politics were pretty, were pretty decent, and I think it's really kind of notable that we have a film that is about, trying to unify the humanity, this week of all weeks.
Right.
It's just, it is I thought that was pretty powerful, and each nation is going to do their own strange things, but this isn't something we haven't seen before. I mean, just look at like World War I, where every nation was sort of, going along with these arcane plans that took everybody to disaster.
Well, but see, I think it would have worked better for me if nobody had been planning to attack the aliens, because that's ridiculous. But
Right.
humans had started fighting
It's
among
a Hollywood
them.
movie about aliens. You have to attack them.
Well, yeah, no, that's my point. But I mean, but if the humans had started fighting among themselves as a result of suspicions and hysteria caused by the aliens, I think that would have been more persuasive to me than we're going to attack the aliens, which you can't possibly imagine you have any chance of success.
Right.
Oh, I think that the humans were squabbling a little bit because of the aliens' arrival. I think that was a pretty pertinent point.
Yeah,
it was
I
making.
felt like the stakes were being raised by humans.
It's like, if one nation they're all sort of working along the same lines. If one person gets out ahead of the pack, that's certainly a threat that you can't have amongst other. One nation really can't have that, especially if you're suspicious of all the people around you.
Right, no, my point is just don't fuck with aliens. That's my point.
Yeah, pretty much.
Everything else is fine. I want to ask you guys, I mean, this movie is so sort of beautiful and contemplative for most of it. And like I said in the trailer, which I know Carol didn't watch, but there's helicopters and soldiers running around and stuff. I wonder if a lot of people who showed up for this movie did not get what they were expecting Independence Day, and were kind of like, well, what is this? I don't know if anyone...
I don't think so. I think that the trailer made it pretty clear that this was a different sort of alien invasion movie, because you don't see, I mean, yes, you see soldiers, but you don't really see like the Battle LA type soldiers where you see a lot of action is right in the forefront. That said, I wonder, the movie has had a 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes so far, and it's gotten really good reviews. But now that everybody else is going to see it, I wonder, I haven't looked at any of the reactions yet because it's technically coming out today. But I would expect that there will be some people who go in watching it and then say, like, what was that about? And, it's definitely a type of film where it will go over some moviegoers' heads.
And Chris, what do you think?
Well, for what it's worth, so I saw it last night in the theater, and the people that were sitting a row behind me as the end credits began to roll, the only reaction I heard from them was the woman turned to the man and said, "Okay." So at that point, I got up and fled because I didn't want to hear them say whatever they were going to say next, because I was so impressed by the movie that I didn't want to hear them diss it. But I got the feeling that they were about to diss it.
Right.
Actually, I would have been riveted to my seat to hear what they had to say about it. And because I saw it in New York City, I heard some, film critic bloviating about style and camera shots and shot length and such. So I fled that conversation.
Right.
Yeah, but I'd love to have heard what an average person would have had to say, because we're science fiction readers.
Mm-hmm.
We all have familiarity with this novella, so we kind of know what to anticipate, and we were satisfied. So it would be kind of interesting to see it with a person who comes in cold.
Now, can we talk about the camera length and the shots? And I'm only half joking there, but it was a really gorgeously shot film. I love there was a heavy emphasis on sort of the camera panning over some very blank surfaces. It looked very minimal at points, from her house to the landscape and the even just the texture on the alien ship. And I'm really attracted to that type of cinematography where you really just take it very slowly, and you have these very wide shots with the people right in the middle. director also did a lot of shots like right on her face, like she was centered right in the middle of the shot as things were going around her. And there's sort of a nice parallel with her face and there's this one gorgeous shot where she sort of looks to the side and in front of her is the alien sentence, and it's sort of in an arc around her head. I thought it was gorgeous. I will watch any film that this guy directs because he's got a really good eye for the camera. And honestly, this makes me a little bit more excited for the next Blade Runner film when that comes out next year sometime. It's like that one film that nobody wants the sequel to, but now I'm even more and more intrigued from the cast to now basically just based on the director who's helming it.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like the editing of this film because I thought it could have been very jumpy because you're jumping frequently from past to present to future, past, future, or whatever. So
yeah.
The transitions could have been really jerky, but they just kind of flowed for me. And as for the camera work, I think there was a lot more handheld in the flashbacks or flash forwards, and that kind of made it a little off-putting. Like, I mean, looking at it as somebody who knows what's going to happen, I thought, hey, that's an interesting choice to make the past, not very perfect.
I didn't notice that, but I really want to see the film again. I'll have to keep an eye out for that. What I really liked is that anybody who's not going into the movie, who's read the book, I think that they would go ahead and sort of assume that. I liked how they sort of segued the flashbacks. They sort of frame the flashes as her past, and then it's not really until the end that you realize that it's really not the past; it's the future that she's seeing. I really like how they did that, especially for somebody who's going into the movie cold. Yeah,
well, I mean, because I read this story, but I read it 10 or 12 years ago, and so I remembered what it was about, but not. It wasn't so forefront in my mind that I was watching that I was thinking in those terms, and so just when you realize that the drawing that the little girl did of her dad and the woman doing a TV show about animals, that's Jeremy Renner. Like even that even like I was like, oh yeah, right, that's what the story's about. Wow, that's so cool, So yeah, I mean, it does work really effectively, I thought, to sort of fake you out that you've watched her backstory when it's actually her future.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I liked about having read it so long ago. I only just reread it yesterday, but I read it as you did 10, 12 years ago, and I liked that I was kind of remembering at the same time as I was experiencing it. It kind of worked with the theme of the film.
Yeah, I read it for the first time about 5 or 6 years ago, and then I read it the day before I went to see the film. So I had the story really fresh in my mind. But, in a way, I was nervous on behalf of the filmmakers because I was just like, yeah, I mean, part of what's so cool about the story is that Ted manages to trick you, the reader, into not realizing it's the future either. I mean, it's about halfway through the story that you start to suspect, oh, wait, this isn't her past. I mean, I had assumed in the story it was her past too. And I was wondering how they would be able to do that effectively on film and make it, I mean, they used different tricks and techniques than Ted used because it's film versus print, but they totally succeeded at it. I thought they did a really, really great job.
Yeah.
But actually, the best thing about the novella to me was the fact that these scenes that take place that you think are in the past, that are actually in the future, he uses future tense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's right there on the page.
Future second person, yeah.
Right, yes. And you don't really realize it until you get to the kind of near the ending.
Yeah.
So I thought that was great because it's right there. It's future tense. So, yeah.
So does anyone know why they changed the title from Story of Your Life to Arrival, or at what stage that happened?
No, but there's also another movie called The Arrival.
Yeah, it's the Charlie Sheen one, right? With the global warming aliens, yeah.
Yeah. And
I know with Arrival they had changed the title a while back. I remember because I had read about it I had written about it for IO9, and it was back in June. I think that one of the things that was always sort of interesting about this film is that it had been really talked up a bit, but it was not really on anybody's radar, even into the middle of the year, which I would have sort of expected to see like a trailer earlier this year, before June. But it wasn't until June that they basically said, we're switching it up from Story of Your Life to Arrival. And what it reminded me of was Edge of Tomorrow, which the original book was All You Need Is Kill. And I think that what it is it's basically just it's basically just a little bit more appealing for audiences. Story of Your Life just doesn't really scream out alien invasion movie, whereas Arrival sort of does, but not in the alien invasion way. It's the NPR version of alien invasion, I guess. But yeah, even I'm looking at the original article now, and even back in June, they didn't say when it was going to be hitting. They just said that it's going to be called Arrival, and it'll be coming out at least sometime later this year. So.
Well, like you said, it seems to be. I mean, you said it's like 100% or so on Rotten Tomatoes. The Atlantic critic just said it's the best movie of the year. I mean, it's talking about in contention for Oscars now at this point. So, yeah, like we were saying, it's just so exciting that, a Ted Chiang short story can become this sort of a movie.
Yeah, looks like it's dropped down to 93%.
What? Those bastards!
Damn it.
But
I think it's my favorite movie of the year.
No, but Andrew, I continue to live in a time when it was 100%.
Yeah, it was before. We saw it before all the haters came in.
All right. Yeah, but I think it's my favorite movie of the year so far. Not positive, but I'm pretty sure. I have to go back and have a think about it, but yeah. It's topping Doctor Strange, and I really like Doctor Strange.
I'm trying to think of what movies I've seen this year. It's been sort of an off year for me. I haven't really seen anything that's really excited me. But this one is definitely by far the best one, at least one of the better science fiction films out there. And it's definitely one of the better films I have seen this year. Although, I'm going to put a caveat on that, is that Rogue One is not out yet, so I can't say that it's my favorite just yet. Just judging from the trailers alone, Rogue One is going to be a good one.
I wouldn't know. I haven't seen the trailers.
Well.
All right, well, cool. So I'm really excited that a Ted Chiang story can be turned into a movie like this, and now I want them to turn lots of other Ted Chiang stories and lots of other short stories by brilliant authors into movies. But so I think a lot of people are going to be learning about Ted Chiang for the first time as a result of this movie. So I want to perform a public service and just recommend what other Ted Chiang stories they should go check out after having seen this movie and reading Story of Your Life. So I don't know if do you guys have any couple suggestions for what Ted Chiang story you think people should go check out next if they haven't read him before?
I think Exhalation is a great example of what a good writer he is. He basically just he creates a cosmology and defines it and just turns it upside down. And Exhalation is about a scientist. How do I explain this? I think he's trying to get to the bottom of why some clocks have struck too soon. And then in doing so, he has to discover the nature of, reality. So.
Right, but he himself is some sort of steampunk robot, the scientist.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
And as are the rest of society. That
was actually the first short story that I had read by him back 2014. I read it and was really amazed by it. And I when I wrote interviews for Lightspeed magazine, I actually interviewed him for that story. That's one I definitely recommend. The other really great one is the life cycle of software objects.
That's such a painful story, though.
It is, but it is an amazing story. I absolutely love it. And I reread it not too long ago, and it is a powerful one.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is all of them, but because they really, I mean, the thing about his writing is his stories, while there are certain common elements, that they're so different one from the next, and yet they're all so brilliant in their own ways. And so, I mean, I think different people are going to find different things that they'll identify with or really, really like in different stories. I mean, the two that I always think of first, well, apart from Story of Your Life, which is definitely one of my favorites, but the other two that I've always really loved is Division by Zero. And again, it's so weird that I like that story so much because I am so not a math person. And that is basically just a story that is all about mathematical equations and different, concepts in math. And yet I think it's the same reason that I really liked the novel The Three Body Problem that came out last year by Cixin Liu. I don't know how you pronounce it. Okay. Because again, I think what Ted can do and what that author can do is they can take these super complicated mathematical and scientific concepts and distill them in a way that not only, can my defective brain grasp them in a way that makes me just see how cool they really are, but it's, these concepts are somehow integrated seamlessly into an awesome story where the character development and the plot and the sort of themes that he's exploring all just play off of each other with those mathematical equations in science. And again, Division by Zero is another harrowing story to read, but I think it's fantastic. And the other one, again, super harrowing, but I love the story Hell is the Absence of God.
I didn't think it was that harrowing. I thought it was actually kind of funny.
Which one are you talking about?
Hell is the Absence of God.
It certainly had comedic elements, but I mean, it's pretty grim and sad as well. I mean, I don't want to give too much away about the story because but yeah, I mean, for sure,
okay. Yeah.
For sure, I laughed throughout it, but it was also sort of like, sad on a whole other level, or, sort of a deeply sad in a way. But, it's funny, you were talking about other stories that could be translated to film. I don't think Division by Zero necessarily could, but I would love to see him translate Hell's the Absence of God. I mean, because that would certainly be cinematic.
Right. I think
all the different
my ass off throughout the entire film.
All the visitations would be super, the special effects guys could go to town.
The fortunate thing is that we have basically almost all of Ted's stories in one volume. So it's not like it's hard to catch up with all of his stuff. And just because he hasn't produced a ton of stories, it's really great just to go out and just read that whole collection. And it's definitely a book I would highly recommend to anybody. I know it was recently re-released by its publisher. They just issued a new version of it with the movie art cover. So hopefully a lot of people will see that and pick it up and just sink right into it.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that Ted's entire body of published fiction is, I think, 15 stories, and 10 of them are available free to read online. So it's very easy to get caught up with his work, and there's pretty much nothing I can think of that would be a better use of your time. And I've really found that Ted Chiang is a good author to recommend to people who don't value science fiction, to show them like, okay, no, this is serious stuff that is of unquestionable literary and intellectual merit. I mean, the quality is so overpowering and undeniable.
Have you been able to convince people to read science fiction by giving them Ted Chiang?
Yeah, I have. I would say so, yeah. I'm a very persuasive person, Carol.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, I conducted an experiment a few years ago when I wrote for Orson Scott Card's Intergalactic Medicine show.
Right, but see, Carol, the mistake you made was using one of my stories. That was a big mistake. Should have used Ted Chiang.
So you remembered that experiment.
Yeah. Yeah, because you showed it to like some relative, and they were just like, this story is a waste of time, basically.
No, I didn't show your story to my relative. I showed a different story. And she's an English teacher. And an amazing writer too, by the way. But yeah.
Another thing that Ted's written that a lot of people cited as one of their favorites, and I mean I love everything he's written, but I would say if anything it was one of my least favorite of his, although I also, it's just a matter of degree, because I still like it, but it's that one, what is it, The Merchant and the Alchemist?
Oh, what? I love that story. You don't like that
No,
story?
don't get me wrong. I'm not dissing the story. I loved it. I'm just saying I love most of his other stuff even more than I liked that one. But I know a lot of people cite that one as one of their all-time favorites. And it's great. It's a great story too. That one I think was published, I think you can find that one on as an I don't know. It's one of the few ebooks I've ever read.
You can find it, and
Yeah.
I agree with you, Chris. I really do, because I liked it a lot. But I mean, I think Exhalation is just the pinnacle, as is Story of Your Life.
Yeah, well, I'm actually, apart from any other reason, I'm really glad we had this panel, because I think I've just realized that one of the only stories of his that I haven't read is Exhalation, and now I'm going to run out and do that.
And I haven't read Division by Zero.
Oh, okay.
Exhalation is available on Lightspeed, so...
Okay, yeah, I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, so Chris, I mean, Merchant of the Alchemist's Gate is one of my favorites, and that's one that I think would translate really well to film.
Mm-hmm.
And then, my other favorites are Story of Your Life and Exhalation, and then I also really like Liking What You See, a documentary, which I just think has a fascinating premise, which is that...
Actually, I don't know that one either.
Oh, okay, so the premise is that there's apparently a real condition you can have as a result of brain damage or something like that, where you can see people's faces and recognize them, but you've lost the ability to gauge whether they're beautiful or not. And so in this story, there's kind of like a community of people who all have done this to themselves through technology intentionally and have done it to their kids as well. So these kids have grown up not understanding, not being able to judge who's attractive among them. And then the community kind of breaks apart and they have to go out into the world and deal with what it means to be judged for your attractiveness for the first time. And so like the main character is this beautiful young woman, and she's never known that she was beautiful before. And like, it's just explores what her experience of that is like. And it's like the title suggests, the documentary, it's sort of in this documentary format where you just hear from different people in this world about what's the upsides and downsides of being able to gauge attractiveness are. And I just think it's really, really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, what was the name of that one again?
It's called Liking What You See, a documentary. All right, cool. Anything else anyone want to say about Ted Chiang stories?
Go read them.
Yeah.
All of them. I still haven't read all of them. He's an author I will sort of visit here and there, but it is definitely probably one of the best short story writers out there right now. It's producing. And I think it's nice that he spends so much time working on each story. They're really crafted, and they just really they really just come out as these great things.
Yeah. I mean, this probably is going to sound a little bit corny, but apart from, a lot of his stories do have this real emotional resonance, but I actually have had the experience reading his stories, particularly when I read them for a second time. So I'm paying a little bit more attention to things like structure and whatnot. I've actually had these moments where, as a writer myself, I'll suddenly sit back and almost feel myself having like an emotion, like getting choked up, just being so in awe of how he's managed to accomplish something he's been able to accomplish in a story, just structurally or thematically. It's just like, it's brilliant. I mean, it's something that's so elegant and so just artistically done that sometimes I just have to sit back and marvel at it. And that he's really that good of a writer.
It's interesting because, he's not a full-time writer. His
Right.
day job is he's a technical writer. And, that you can't make a living writing one short story every year or two, no matter how good they are and no matter how many awards they win and so on. But now that they're starting to get turned into movies, I wonder if he could, become a full-time fiction writer. And, because I think if you write a short story and it gets turned into a big feature film like this, you're making pretty good money. So
probably not to live on. I would be very surprised if that was the case.
Really? Because I don't know.
Yeah, gone are the days where you could live off of the proceeds of one film.
Well, I don't know what sort of deals and what were made in terms of Ted, but I do remember reading articles that when this story was sold at auction at, I think, was it the Cannes Film Festival? It broke the record for the amount of money that it went to I don't remember. If you Google it, you'll see what I'm talking about. But it was the largest sum of money paid for acquiring this film in the history of the festival.
Wow.
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily trickle down.
No, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, so I don't know what that means for Ted, but at the time that it broke the record.
I mean, I studied screenwriting in LA, and what I seem to remember, I've never sold anything for a movie, so I wouldn't know, but so what I seem to remember hearing is that according to Writers Guild rules, if they base a movie on your work, they have to pay you 1% of the budget of the film. So if it's $100 million film, that would be $1 million. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but
that's still not enough to live on in this age.
Yeah.
$1 million? Carol, you give me $1 million, I will live on that like you wouldn't believe.
I live in New York City. Maybe my perception is skewed because of the price of the rents around here, but yes.
Well, I also live in New York City, and I don't have $1 million. But if you want to help me out, you can go to patreon.com/geek.
Yeah, it looks like the film cost $50 million to make, and it Paramount paid $20 million to buy it, to distribute it in North America and China. So that, that's a good amount of money.
Yeah,
but
go Ted.
I mean, film residuals certainly don't hurt, and I just it's still not. It's probably just not as reliable a way to make a living as just to live off of residuals. So, but hopefully there will be more movies based on Ted Chiang stories, and it'll boost him into the spotlight a bit more, and it'll sort of just reinforce that he's a really great author.
Yeah, I mean, after this, you kind of think he's got to become the next Philip K. Dick of Hollywood, and
I hope so.
Maybe I don't know. I just think I don't know if he even wants to write full time, but it would be nice. It would just be nice for me to know that people could do that, writing short stories. I mean, I think that would be really cool. All right, cool. So, are we done? Any final thoughts or anything?
My final thought on the film is just go see it, and go see it cold if you haven't read the short story, and you can always pick up the short story again. But it's definitely one of the very few examples I can think of where the movie is maybe not as good, but it is comparable to the short story in a lot of ways. You don't see a lot of adaptations that are like that, and it is, even if it was not based on a film, it is a really good science fiction film, and it's definitely up there with like Gravity and Moon for me, which are some of my favorites.
All right, cool. Chris, final thoughts?
I'm just going to echo what's been said. I mean, see the film and read his fiction. There's really not much more I can say than that. I went into it with high expectations, and for the most part, my expectations were met with, again, only minor quibbles. I think they really captured the underlying essence of the story.
Okay, Carol, final thought.
Yeah, I agree with Andrew that it's not often you get to see a movie where it is as good as the source material, and it is as good as the novella. Almost, no, I guess I take that back. I think I had a little more of an emotional response with the novella, but still it was a great adaptation, and I really enjoyed the hell out of it, and it's up there with my favorite science fiction films of recent years, which are Moon and The Martian.
All right, yeah, so I guess our takeaways are, this is a novella, not a short story or a novelette.
I'm glad to see that I think all of us have made that mistake.
Because it doesn't feel like it. It doesn't feel like it.
I just read it, and I can't believe it was a novella. I blew right through it. So that's a takeaway, and also don't fight aliens, and send me money. I think are the main takeaways from this discussion. And so I think we're going to wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with Chris Cevasco, Andrew Liptak, and Carol Pinchefsky. So guys, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Chris Cevasco, Andrew Liptak, and Carol Pinchefsky for joining us on the show. Big thanks as well to everyone who's given us 5 stars on iTunes, including St. John 17, LRM 77, and Tate Williams. Tate writes, I can't even begin to describe all the great fiction and nonfiction I've been introduced to through this podcast. But more than that, it's a smart, rational, even-tempered analysis and often criticism of science fiction and fantasy as literature, philosophy, and culture. David Barr Kirtley is an extremely talented interviewer. He's well-informed, always does his research, and more than anything displays an inspiring level of genuine appreciation and curiosity about his subject matter that is not easy to find. He listens and wants to learn, and Geek's Guide to the Galaxy listeners are always rewarded for it. So big thanks again to Tate Williams for that great review. I'd also like to give a special thank you to Bill Gibson, who just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time or fixed monthly contribution, you can do that via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.